And this is Katherine Romans. I'm the Executive Director of the Hill Country Alliance, and I'm very excited and frankly a little bit nervous to welcome you to our first ever virtual leadership summit, where we will be talking about the future of conservation in the Texas Hill Country. We are so grateful for all of you who are able to join us today and join us hopefully over the next 3 days as we line up all of the wonderful, inspiring, and engaging presentations and conversations that normally we would love to have in person over this new Zoom format. So let's get right into it. Normally with our Hill Country Leadership Summit, we would be queuing up a perfect Hill Country day. We would have a beautiful setting for you to gather in person under the oak trees at Camp Lucy along the banks of Onion Creek in Dripping Springs. And while we really wanted to try to pull off an in-person gathering, it just wasn't in the cards this year. And so and thinking about, all of the best things about our leadership summit, thinking about the wonderful food, the music, the inspiration, what I really came to realize was that is all secondary. And what is most important about our leadership summit is the people. It is the opportunity to come together, to share stories and lessons learned, to celebrate successes, to see how we've changed over the years and grown, to come together to ask questions and engage on new topics, new issues, to make new connections and meet new people. And of course, think about how we are working to protect all that we know and love about the Texas Hill Country for future generations. Most importantly, the Hill Country Leadership Summit provides an opportunity to be inspired. And so we hope that what we've pulled together for the next 3 days really accomplishes those things, allows you to engage with new ideas, learn from our speakers, ask questions. We hope you're queuing up questions as we speak. For some of the topics and panels that we'll be covering over the next few days. As a reminder, we will be gathering for these live sessions for just 2 hours a day for the next 3 days. We'll be going from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock today. On Thursday, tomorrow, we'll start right at 10 o'clock in the morning and go until lunchtime. And then again on Friday, we'll start at 10 a.m. and go until lunchtime. We hope if you are really excited about one particular topic, if you came to learn about regenerative grazing in the Texas Hill Country, that you will stick around for our water lightning round this afternoon. Or if the night skies is your passion, you will find something interesting and innovative to learn about from our conversation about economic development in the Hill Country. So please use that landing page website that we've shared through email to see the full agenda for all 3 days and to learn about our speakers, check out their bios, and find some pre-recorded material. All of our sessions will be recorded and will be posted on that website after the fact. So if you have to miss anything, if you've got another meeting, don't worry, we'll be posting everything to that website. I want to take a moment now to just really thank our exemplary staff at the Hill Country Alliance. This awkward photo is the last time that we were able to gather together in person in a socially distanced way along the banks of the Blanco River. It takes a lot to pull off a remote event, and our staff has been working overtime to make these next 3 days happen. So thank you so much. You will have the opportunity to get to know and meet the staff a little bit more, as they are going to have a much more active role in moderating panels and participating in this year's event. Of course, our board of directors, many of our board are going to be participants in the next 3 days. We have a phenomenal board of directors that bring not only passion and expertise, but a true dedication to the mission of the Hill Country Alliance. So thank you to our board. And of course, thank you so much to our speakers, all of the panelists and presenters who volunteered their time to be a part of this digital summit. We wouldn't be here without you. So thank you so much to our speakers. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the generosity of our incredible sponsors for this event. And really, we were blown away by the response when we put out the call for sponsorships kind of late in the game. Many of our important partners from across the region chipped in to make this event a reality. And so thank you to all of the sponsors. I want to just voice a particular thanks to the Cynthia and George Mitchell Foundation for their incredible support. You will see many of the organizations that we're going to be spotlighting over the next 3 days. Many of their work and their projects are supported by the Mitchell Foundation. So they have been transformative for water, in particular in Central Texas. The Dixon Water Foundation has been a huge partner for the Hill Country Alliance, so thank you so much to the Dixon Water Foundation. And I also want to give a special shout out to Ira Yates and Yates Cattle and Conservation. Thank you, Ira, for your support. Thank you to all of our incredible sponsors. So whether you are sitting on your couch or at your desk or a kitchen table or phoning in from the road somewhere in the Hill Country, we hope that we can bring the level of inspiration that we would normally expect from a day together at Camp Lucy. This day is all about celebrating you, celebrating the work of our incredible partners and supporters, and honestly, the conservation of the Texas Hill Country wouldn't happen without you. So thank you all for joining us today. Of course, we are on all the standard social media platforms, so feel free to follow us, to like us, to tag. If you're into hashtags, I'm for the number 4, the Hill Country is our hashtag. We would love to keep the conversation going online. Reach out with any questions or feedback. I will be here all 3 days. I will just say we have had a wonderful time working with Innovative Event Management, IEM. They are our technical gurus for the next 3 days. It's been fantastic working with them. But I will go ahead and say we appreciate your patience, as this is our first really big online event that the Hill Country Alliance is hosting. And please forgive any technical glitches. We think it's going to go smoothly, but we appreciate your patience with us as we work through that. So with that, I am ready to kick it off to our first panel of the 9th Annual Hill Country Leadership Summit, and HCA's very own Daniel Oppenheimer, who's our Land Program Manager, is going to be hosting and moderating this discussion. He's lined up some phenomenal panelists to talk about regenerative grazing in the Texas Hill Country. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Daniel.
All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Again, I'm Daniel Oppenheimer and I'm the Land Program Manager for the Hill Country Alliance, and we'll be kicking the summit off today with a panel on regenerative grazing. We're going to explore the current use of regenerative grazing in the Hill Country, how it is helping improve land health, and how it may be scaled up in an increasingly fragmented landscape. If you have any questions along the way, please don't be shy. Type them into the chat function, and we'll spend a few minutes towards the end of the session digging into your questions. At this time, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And as you do so, you have the option to turn on your video so that all the participants can see your faces. And so, Mandy, if we could start with you, quick introduction, and if you want to turn on your camera, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Daniel, and thank you to the Hill Country Alliance for asking me to be on the panel today. My name is Mandy Krause, and I live in Dehennis, Texas, so just south of the Hill Country, but very, very close. And my husband and I own a business called Parker Creek Ranch that we started in 2010, and we produce grass-fed beef and pasture-raised poultry. Very glad to be here with y'all today.
Cool. Thanks, Mandy. How about Jeremiah? Do you have a video option that you can turn on, Jeremiah, so we can all see you?
Yes, sir. Is that working? It looks fuzzy on my end.
It's a little fuzzy. Oh, there you are.
Maybe the camera's dirty. There we go. Glad to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremiah Eubank. My wife and I manage Pure Pastures Ranch here in Canyon Lake. I handle most of the production, animals and everything. My wife handles the marketing. We direct market everything we raise. Grass-fed beef, pastured pork, grass-fed lamb, and a few eggs from chickens and ducks.
Great, thanks, Jeremiah. How about Chad?
Yeah, do you have me, Daniel?
I sure do, Chad. We can hear you loud and clear.
Hi, everybody. This is Chad Lemke. You'll have to excuse me. I am tech challenged, so I'm calling in. I am located in Mason, Texas. The name of our operation is McCollum-Lemke Ranches. It's a family-run operation that's been in operation for well over 100 years. We cover about 4 counties. I am also production manager for the Grass-Fed Livestock Alliance, where we aggregate and market grass-fed beef throughout the Southwest. Also sit on the board of directors of the American Grass-Fed Association, and I'm one of the directors of the Grass-Fed Sustainability Group, which is the Texas Savory Hub for Holistic Management.
Thank you, Chad. Next, let's hear from Kara, and if you've got a video function, Kara, we'd love to see you.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Daniel, for having me. Again, my name is Kara Kroeger, and I work for the National Center for Appropriate Technology, which is also known as NCAT. And I come to agriculture by way of being an herbalist, nutritionist, and chef for the past 18 years. I realized in that work that we weren't getting anybody any healthier until we started improving the quality of agriculture and soil health. So I am lucky enough to manage a project at NCAT called Soil for Water, and that is an initiative to catch and hold more rainwater in the soil. And we work to create a critical mass of landowners who are applying regenerative ag practices that improve soil health and the water cycle. So that's in Texas and across the nation. And we offer regenerative agriculture trials, educational outreach, and peer-to-peer networking opportunities in that program. So if you're interested, please check out soilforwater.org. And I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks to our panelists for joining us. Kara, I'd love to start with you. There are a variety of descriptive terms out there for different approaches to grazing. Tell us a little bit about regenerative grazing. What is it? What distinguishes it from other approaches, and what makes it so compelling?
All right, well, that's kind of a hard question to answer in a short period of time, but I'm gonna do my best. And I think that in order to do so, we have to look to the past to think about agriculture as a whole. So for the most part, the agricultural practices of the last century have taken really a reductionist approach, and they've really minimized, they've oversimplified complex biological processes and minimized them and distorted them. So we became really hyper-focused in agriculture on high yield through adding chemical inputs, and that will reduce the soil's natural ability to function and we created reliance on external factors that cost a lot of money. So unfortunately, we've seen some of the negative effects that these farming and ranching practices have had, as well as the urbanization of rural lands. And we've seen the effects that these practices have had on water cycles, soil biology, and overall biodiversity and ecological resiliency. So luckily today, there are solutions that are becoming better understood and adopted by producers around the globe. And a lot of these solutions go beyond sustainable, and instead they're defined as regenerative. So regenerative agriculture can be practiced both in a farming environment as well as a ranching environment. And ultimately, these methodologies seek to add more back to the soil than they're taking through a self-nourishing ecological system. So ideally, it would look like a closed loop system where humans manage agricultural lands to help reverse the previous negative impact that we had on the environment and restore ecology while continuing to produce food, fuel, and fiber. And this can lead to healthy soil, which is capable of producing high quality, nutrient-dense food. Yay, I'm all about that. And also improving rather than degrading the land. So overall, this is going to increase resiliency from a social, economic, and environmental standpoint. And we do this by producing with less chemical inputs and increasing the income for regenerative ag producers. Many of them sell direct to consumers, which can sometimes lead to greater returns for that producer. And this is in turn going to foster healthier communities through better nutrition and overall environmental conditions. So some of the ways that we can practice regenerative agriculture is through cover cropping or pasture cropping. When you're grazing, you can put crops into the pasture that can help build biodiversity and also keep the soil covered for a period of time. So cover cropping can be used in grazing management or regular farm management. Conservation tillage practices are also going to be helpful. So either strip till or no till when it comes to farming, or if you're trying to prep some grazing land for use in the future. We want to minimize chemical, biological, and mechanical disturbance in fields. So by way of conservation tillage practices, we can do that. We also want to cultivate biodiversity through practices like crop rotating or creating wildlife habitat in a pasture where you're grazing, getting native plant species that can help keep that wildlife predominant in the pasture, which keeps the pasture healthier and keeps the soil microbiology underground healthier as well. And one of the ways that we can do that is by keeping continuous live root in the ground that will feed the microbes below ground, which helps fertilize the plants and allow them to grow more forage above ground. Additionally, reducing or eliminating harmful chemical inputs like fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and different things like that can really be helpful and be a regenerative ag practices. And last but not least, the incorporation of livestock and managing that livestock in a holistic way, such as adaptive multi-paddock grazing, where you have high intensity, short duration movement of animals across a pasture that can help improve soil health and overall have less of a negative effect on your pasture, which often happens through continuous grazing. So those are some of the regenerative agriculture practices. Ultimately, creating resilient land through regenerative ag also has the capacity to recover more quickly from weather disasters like flooding and droughts, which we experience a lot here in Texas. So by increasing soil organic matter through regenerative practices by 1%, you have the potential to hold 25,000 gallons of water per acre more. And so that's going to help keep both cool and warm season forage greener for longer periods of time and sequester carbon from the atmosphere. So it's said by Regenerative International, a nonprofit, that if we transition 10 to 20% of agricultural production to best practice regenerative systems, we have the potential to sequester enough carbon dioxide to reduce to reverse climate change. And those are variable facts, but there's a lot of potential in regen ag to really improve our environmental conditions. And one of the best ways that you as a consumer can do that is through finding sources from some of the farmers like you're going to be learning from today, and buying from farmers markets or CSAs, and also supporting corporations like Patagonia, General Mills, and Dannon, who are actually bringing regenerative ag products into the greater markets through corporations.
Thanks, Kara. It sounds like a lot of moving parts, both literally and figuratively.
It certainly is.
Well, I'd love to transition over to some of our other panelists. Chad, you and your family have been ranching, I think now 5 generations. Y'all been ranching in Texas. Tell us a little bit about your own journey. What inspired you to tap into regenerative grazing?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, we've got some pieces of property that have been in the family well over 100 years, and in the last couple of decades, we've been fortunate enough to add some. I'll tell you quite simply, I differ a little bit from a lot of people in the regenerative agriculture world. Daniel, you and I have talked about this a little bit. Profit's number one. Everything we do is because we have to make a profit, and the reason to that is simple, is because we're real world producers, and if we don't make a profit, we won't be here tomorrow. Now, that being said, that does not mean that everything else cannot be up to and or equal to that methodology of thinking. Land health, land stewardship, land improvement, we called it sustainability for a long time. Now we call it regenerative. All those things play into profitability. The other issue is that given the fact that I'm 5th generation, my children are 6, and we just had our first granddaughter born on the ranch, so she is now the 7th generation. We come from a long line of farmers and ranchers, and we're not going to lose it on our watch. So quite simply, when we began our journey right at 20 years ago, I actually came from the landscaping world. I didn't grow up farming and ranching, but spent summers and holidays. So when it was my turn to take the reins, my wife and I started looking at anything and everything that could help do things better and make a better profit. Everyone said, son, you can't make a living farming and ranching. And so we were bound and determined to prove them wrong. We came across holistic management. That was one of the beginning tenets of us on our journey, and we haven't looked back since. So I think, as I tell many, many people, it's a journey. It's not a destination. We went from conservationists to land stewards. Specialized products, grass-fed, all of those came into play, sustainable, and now we're at regenerative. But the simple fact is, how do we improve all of the ecosystem processes that we manage, provide a better living for the families that operate off of the farming and ranching world, improve our communities, and maintain the highest level of animal welfare? So that's where we are, and that's where we came from.
Chad, thank you very much. Jeremiah, as someone a little newer to regenerative grazing, tell us a little bit about how you started to adopt some of these regenerative practices.
We kind of came about this from the, like Kara, from the food side of it, and we wanted to, give our kids a little bit better food than what we could find out there. Started really looking into everything and how everything was raised, and just decided if we wanted it to be done right, we were going to have to do it ourselves. And we've made an effort to do the best that we can, with what we had. We started out in a very small acreage, doing stuff for ourselves and selling to a few customers, and then moved up here to Canyon Lake about this time last year, and have kind of been able to scale this up with the help of the owner of the ranch here, and we're managing everything for him and rotating our cows around, giving them the best forage we can get them. Basically trying to build soil has been our main focus, and try to keep all the rain, the little bit of rainfall that we get, so that we can grow the best animals we can.
Great, thanks, Jeremiah. So we heard from Kara earlier that there are a lot of aspects to what can be regenerated in terms of processes, and then things like the water holding capacity of the soil biology, the ecological resilience. There's a lot of potential to improve various aspects of land health. Mandy, I know that somehow you have found time to do some formal research at Parker Creek Ranch. Could you tell us a little bit about the type of research that you've conducted, and what changes you've seen at the place since y'all started to adopt regenerative practices.
Definitely. So my background is in actually wildlife and fishery sciences, and I had that research background, and I was really excited when we started our business 10 years ago to start incorporating that into what we saw out here. So we slowly started measuring the vegetation in 2013, because at that time we started using a practice called deep soil ripping or subsoiling, deep soil ripping. You can use them interchangeably. But that is the practice of taking a subsoiling shank and cutting deep slices into the earth to allow water to infiltrate and capture that rain and hold it on the landscape. Like many people around Texas, waters are one of our major limiting factors out here. It's really, really hard to be in grass-fed beef business when you're in the middle of a drought. So anyways, capturing the rain and then learning, and looking at measuring that was really important to us. And so we did some SARE funded research the last 2 years. That's Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. They provided us with some funding to do on-farm research, and we were measuring the rate of infiltration and how that was affected by our deep soil ripping. And we saw, we looked at 2 different pastures that were, one was in really poor soil health. The other one was in pretty fair soil health, and both of them showed an increased rate of infiltration by using this practice. The one that was in better soil quality health, it increased the rate of infiltration by 3 times. So both were positive effects that we saw through that research. That was a formal research project. Most of what we do is just looking out and reading the landscape honestly, and understanding, seeing what happens throughout the seasons, what's improving, what's not. And like Chad said, it's definitely a journey, not a destination. It changes every year. But some of the other things that we've seen improve out here on our land, other than the increased water infiltration rate, which is huge, definitely huge, our soil organic matter has increased on average from 1% to 4. And that's been over the last 10 years. So that was really positive for us. It's not huge, but to us, that was huge. A little at a time is kind of our motto. And another thing that we have seen slowly change and improve over the years is we've been planting native grasses and establishing those throughout this home place that we manage. We've fenced off our riparian areas, so our riparian area is beginning to improve. And then lastly, it's just overall improved and increased biodiversity, which is one of our #1 goals out here, is managing, the habitat for wildlife and the livestock.
So we've got a broad audience with us today, Mandy. Some folks are producers, some are land stewards, and some folks may have never heard of regenerative grazing before this panel. Tell us the so what when you increase infiltration of water by 2 or even 3 times. What does that mean? Why is that the tremendous success for you as a rancher?
What it looked like, to paint a picture for you, in 2012, as we were coming out of that terrible, terrible drought, our hilltop pastures were just covered in a hard pan soil. The termites had eaten any kind of residual organic matter that was left standing. So it looked like the desert. And we would watch, when it would rain, we would watch just it sheet off the ground, and it would run down the road to the neighbor's place. And we would stare at it and say, we have to capture that water. We have to hold it on this land if we want to improve the land over time. And so that's when we started reading about practices and came across the deep soil ripping. And so as we would cut the ground and let that water infiltrate, what it would do would slowly sink that water, store it, spread it underground, and a little over time that would allow the plants to grow and repair. There's, it's definitely a fine practice. You can't just go out there and deep soil, subsoil your whole place. You have to take in consideration your soil type. We have a medium to heavy clay soil, so it's a great practice for us. But so soil types of consideration, frequency, how often do you do this, and allow to increase the infiltration on your land. You want to look at the slope of your land, the vegetation that's already there, what your overall management goals. But #1 for us, we would watch the water just sheet off the land, and we wanted to capture it and store it. And that's what increasing the rate of infiltration did for us. It helped us slow it and sink it in the ground.
Well, thanks, Mandy. I just want to remind folks, if you have any questions throughout the panel, please don't be shy. I believe I might have said enter them into the chat function. I think for your screens, it's actually a Q&A button. So again, don't be shy. Type in any questions and we'll circle back to those in a little bit. Mandy, thank you very much. Kara, you work with quite a few farmers and ranchers across Central Texas. What are some of the other changes that you and they are seeing as they're starting to adapt some of these regenerative practices? And I believe you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you. Overall, soil infiltration is a really big one, but that being said, too, we really focus on we really focus the Soil for Water initiative on the 5 soil health principles. And so, as I mentioned before, that's keeping the soil covered, minimizing disturbance, continual live plant, live root in the ground, integrating livestock, and increasing biodiversity. One of the things that is really important for also increasing water infiltration and available water holding capacity of the soil in general is healthy soil microbiology below ground. And one of the things that we really try to get our producers to focus on is keeping continuous live plant, live root in the ground as much as possible. So when a plant is living in the soil, it's able to photosynthesize, which then takes carbon and it's turned into carbon in the plant into exudates that are seeped from the roots of the plant down into the soil. And those are given to the soil microbiology in exchange for different nutrients that the plant needs to grow. And so as people are making these changes on their land, especially in a pasture environment, we're looking to move the soil from being bacterially dominant to more fungal dominance. And that fungal dominance also helps hold more soil in the water because of the way that they create their kind of hyphae root structure that fungi is made up of. So basically, I really help people to understand that that continual live plant, live root in the ground is important. And a lot of our producers will do that through pasture cropping. So they will take a combination of different plants. A lot of times it's buckwheat or sorghum sudan or sun hemp or various plants that are specific to kind of hotter, more humid climates. And they'll put those out in the pasture that allows that ground to stay covered. It increases the biodiversity, it feeds the microbes, and it's going to also in turn become forage for the livestock. So after you get that pasture crop established, you can then turn the livestock out into that field once the season's coming to an end or in the middle of it, and allow that livestock to eat down that, that cover crop. And in turn, at the same time, that livestock is going to be making divots in the soil with their hoofs, which is going to help kind of create little puddles of water that allow it to slowly infiltrate into the soil. Additionally, they're going to dung and urinate on the ground as well, which is going to help provide different nitrogen sources. And then the ruminant gut is chock full of microbiology. And so those microbes will then also go down into the soil and help increase the soil microbiome that exists down into the soil, creating more soil health. So I'd say that cover cropping is another really great practice that a lot of people can do. You don't have to integrate livestock into that either. If you don't have livestock, you can use some of those on areas where you're just trying to reestablish the ecology, reestablish the ecosystem as well.
Thank you. So of course, this is an event hosted by the Hill Country Alliance. And so I'd like to bring our focus now specifically to the Hill Country. We know that the population of this region is growing. Some projections see us doubling our population in the next 35 to 40 years. With that growth, with that development, we're seeing lots of change, including considerable land fragmentation that's dividing large ranches across the Hill Country. Jeremiah, I'd love to start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience that you've had working with and leasing land from small acreage landowners for regenerative grazing?
Most of mine comes from, previous to this year when we were in a much smaller operation. We leased about 75 acres total on 2 different places. And that was mainly for cattle and sheep, rotating them through. I think one of the challenges with the hill country stuff, especially now that we're on a much larger operation, is the smaller acreage places. It's a lot harder to make the economics work for a big operation, especially if there's any kind of distance involved where you've got to trailer animals and things like that. Neighboring places are a lot better when you can, just open a gate and move cattle over there the same as if it was a pasture you owned. It makes things a lot easier. So the economics work a lot better. When you've got to move stuff around, it gets a little bit more difficult. And landowners really, from a producer's standpoint, we need landowners to be more as flexible as possible with their land. We know they have their objectives and what they want to accomplish. They always need to understand that we do too. And the economics, like Chad talked about earlier, the economics are paramount. If it doesn't make money, it's hard to make it justifiable. So.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to open this up to Chad, Mandy, and Jeremiah for those small acreage landowners that might be interested in having regenerative grazing on their places. Perhaps it's to maintain their agricultural valuation, or maybe they're interested in some of the land health improvements that Kara and Mandy outlined earlier. What advice do you have for them? What would encourage you as a producer to work with that hypothetical small acreage landowner?
I'll be happy to go first. We lease a lot of land, and we have over the years. We've got some smaller places and some bigger places that are in the lease portfolio. Obviously, working with the smaller places, as Jeremiah discussed earlier, it's much more difficult and much more complex. You've got to have an understanding, sit down with those owners, the decision makers of that property, and figure out what their goals and what their context is, define what your goals and your context are, and then figure out what a mutually beneficial relationship can look like. A lot of what we encourage and recommend is using small ruminants. Sheep and goats are a lot easier to move. You need a lot less handling facility. Of course, a lot of small landowners do not have the infrastructure to be able to manage those as well. So that comes back to us as producers. Are we going to help them build up their infrastructure and external fences, maybe in return for a longer lease? Are we going to use temporary things that we can move around? Again, as Jeremiah said, that gets into significant time and financial complexity. There has to be a certain size of that ranch or that tract of land in order to make it viable. It's extremely difficult with the 5, 10, 15, 20 acre type properties. When you get up to 50 or 100, obviously it's a whole lot easier. It's very difficult to put together enough land adjoining, as Jeremiah alluded to, that you can actually move animals. So it is one of the most difficult things that we have facing agriculture in the hill country. Traditionally, people have gone out, bought a tract of land, they go out and buy 5 cows, throw it on there, those animals eat the grass down until it's gone, then those people start feeding hay. Well, all of us that have managed anything for any length of time know exactly what that does to the land and the ecosystem, and it's a big reason that we're with the problems that we are for our ecoregion. But it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of dialogue, and quite honestly, most producers do not have the time, energy, and resources to do it. So I think, Jeremiah, you made a really good statement earlier. Landowners are going to have to understand that they've got to meet in the middle. It can't just be, it's my land, it's my way. on the flip side, we as producers must be able to offer a benefit and an improvement. We have to prove and show that we can regenerate their land, not degrade it, and figure out how we can make those relationships mutually beneficial.
Chad, you mentioned needing, especially on these smaller tracts, the right infrastructure, and you gave fencing as an example. What are some other key ingredients, whether that's infrastructure or other on-the-ground considerations for finding a good fit? Chad, you still there?
Oh, sorry. I thought that was addressed to the group. I didn't want to monopolize. Well, first of all, the place has to have grass. It has to not have been overgrazed. It has to have some semblance of fencing. The perimeter fence, usually when a new landowner takes over a smaller tract of land, they go in and fence it. We're finding that occurring more and more, which is a good thing. So that reduces the perimeter. But if you're going to do any kind of planned grazing, ultra-high stock density, rotational grazing, whatever moniker you want to use to talk about moving animals with purpose, being able to control their grazing, and then getting them off of that property before they do any damage, then you're going to have to use electric fence. When we first started putting up electric fence a couple of decades ago, people used to drive by and talk in town and talk at the feed store about how those animals stayed in the middle of the field and never left. Then we found out we were using electric fence, and oh, well, isn't that cruel? Those animals don't get to move around. Once we discussed it, told them that sometimes they get moved 3 or 4 times a day, that it's like going to an all-you-can-eat buffet and they bring out the new trays of food, everybody goes running, it put it in a whole different perspective for them. And so now there are a lot more people using electric fence, but obviously that's the most cost-effective. Then the third thing is water. There are a lot of places that may have old water troughs, may have only single source in 50 or 100 acres, and so you're going to have to develop that too. So when we're looking at mutually beneficial leasing arrangements where we can really improve a person's land, then we have to have a longer term lease. Those are more difficult to come by. But after you do it long enough and you show people are driving by, they see that you may have 2 to 3 times as much forage as the neighbor, then those opportunities start to present itself. So it's somewhat the chicken or the egg. Do you get the lease first? Do you find a small place, turn it into a real show place, then show people what you can do? It's still a very individualized and very relational transaction.
Thanks.
I'll add one thing to that really quick, Daniel. Just be real quick. We lease everything. We don't own a single acre. And our leases vary in size from 20 acres up to a couple hundred acres. And, you know, the one thing that we look for when we're searching for land, of course, good forage, like Chad said, and all the other things that Chad and Jeremiah both mentioned, is shared goals. You know, we have a relationship with these individuals, but some of them only keep their ag valuation. They only even have enough forage for us to put our animals there for 1 month. And so we either do it animal unit per acre per month, or we do animal unit per month, or on our longer term leases we have we do it by acre, of course, you know, and so for some of the smaller landowners it might be beneficial to say, okay, let me have your animals out here for just a month if we're set up to do it, and then we move them off. And for us it's super beneficial because all we want to do is give our home place a rest, and adequate rest for all these properties that we're managing and rotating our animals through. So that's just another option, is that it doesn't have to be a full term all year long lease. It could just be a shorter duration.
Cool. Thanks,
I've got one thing to add to this lease discussion too. One thing we struggled with when, especially, and we're not leasing any outland right now, but in the past when we were smaller, we struggled with finding land to lease. I think it would be a great thing if somebody like Hill Country Alliance or NCAT would establish some type of program to help connect producers and possibly vetted producers, regen producers, to those landowners and make those opportunities a little bit more available to both sides, and that would hopefully connect some of these objectives.
Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our colleagues at TWA, Texas Wildlife Association, are in the process of developing an interactive online platform that would do something similar to what you, Jeremiah, are describing, but I think that's still in development, and I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for even mentioning that at this point.
I don't think you'll get in trouble. I think it was waylaid by COVID, but I think that is something that they are trying to put into place. So I also just wanted to mention that for people who do want to lease and they would like to get a little bit of infrastructure set up on their land, they can contact the Natural Resource Conservation Service and possibly apply for the EQIP program. That's EQIP. And that is a cost matching program for putting infrastructure up, like cross fencing or water tanks and things of that sort. So the Natural Resource Conservation Service is where you would go for that.
Thanks, y'all. Well, I have a few more questions in my back pocket, but I'd like to pause now and ask my colleague, Leah. Leah, do we have any questions from the audience? Let's hear what they're thinking about, and we'll go from there.
We sure do. We've gotten a lot of questions, actually. So for the record, any of the panelists, you can go down and click the Q&A box. There are a couple questions that are directed specifically at folks, especially Mandy. You've gotten a bunch of questions, but one that I think we should definitely ask live on the air is how prevalent regenerative ag is in the hill country. Does this enable landowners to do ranching on smaller pieces of land? What sort of acreage do you need? I know we've talked about leasing, but how prevalent is this?
Mandy, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. So in the last 10 years, when we started this, you know, we started by selling our product on the side of the roads in San Antonio. We had 3 drop-off locations, and we were selling chickens. We built our own processing facility. We did all of our own birds and our own processing. And at that time, you didn't see it as much. And I say chickens is because when we think grazing, we usually think cattle, sheep, or goats. But there's a lot of different types of operations that you can explore for smaller acreage. You don't have to just produce the ungulates. You know, the poultry is a great option if you're wanting, especially eggs. We usually suggest to people, if you're wanting to dabble into this, starting with laying hens is because they're easy. You're not going to have a huge investment up front, and you can explore the market. So I do believe that the opportunities are increasing. I think people are starting to really believe in this kind of agriculture. We see so much positivity around it. When we talk about regenerative, it's not just rebuilding the land and healing the land and the soil. You're also looking at the communities, the health, food aspect. And so those are the things that I think are driving people, and that's why we're seeing an increase in these type of operations, which is a great thing.
We've got a great geographic representation. We've got, again, Mandy's down in sort of the southwest corner of the hill country. We got Jeremiah over in Canyon Lake, and Chad up in Mason, and Kara, you work all over. What are your thoughts as far as this question of the prevalence and growth of regenerative agriculture in the hill country?
Well, I'm really lucky in that I get to have my finger on the pulse of what's going on nationwide with a lot of agricultural production. So the regenerative ag movement is definitely strong. For instance, let's take the article in Texas Monthly that just came out on beef production. They featured Rome Ranch, which is right in your neck of the woods, Daniel, and they are producing regenerative beef labeled under Force of Nature. And there's also quite a few products that are hitting the market on a national scale that are produced regeneratively, and some of those are coming from Texas. So Blue Nest beef, there's a new one called Wholesome Meats that was just launched this week by Soilworks. So it's actually pretty predominant, and by no means is it 10%, but we're slowly striving in that direction. I think that ag producers throughout Texas are really realizing that we are far enough south that if we don't start doing things different, we're not going to be producing cattle in the next 10 to 20 years. If we don't start getting our soil in better shape and allowing that soil organic matter to build so that we can store more water in the soil. We can't produce without water storage in the soil. And so it is happening. It is a big movement. It takes time and it takes a lot of patience. I mean, this sounds very idealistic and very exciting, but people who are in regenerative agriculture have to be really, really strong individuals. There's a lot of highs and lows that come along with it. And the weather in Texas is very challenging. So just to be realistic, I mean, it's possible and you can move it along, but you know, Mandy, Jeremiah, Chad can all attest, everybody has these ebbs and flows that you have to move through, whether you're in agriculture or not, but in regenerative ag, sometimes, especially at the beginning, even more so.
Awesome. I've got another question that I think is a good follow-up to that. So for folks that are interested in getting involved with regenerative agriculture, what are some of the resources, some educational consulting resources folks can use? Do you have any recommendations? And are your ranches open for touring so that folks could potentially learn about it in person?
Great question. Mandy, Chad, I especially want to hear from y'all.
Real quick, I'll mention we do on non-COVID times, we do farm tours quarterly, we do field days, we do consulting, we go out to people's places, people come out here often, and we love doing that. My husband publishes a great blog and he writes a lot about this kind of stuff, and it's called the pastoralist.blog, so I do recommend that y'all check that out. You might like that. That's one I'd pass to you. And I'm trying to answer some of these questions about ripping in the chat. Hopefully they've gone through. So I'm going to keep tackling those.
Cool. Chad, would love to hear from you as far as the opportunities that you provide in terms of education and good exposure to these practices.
Sure, happy to. Like I said earlier, we're the Texas Savory Hub, so we're aligned with the Savory Institute, which is a worldwide holistic management organization. So yes, we do classes, we do consulting, we do field days, like Mandy said. When COVID is a little bit more under control, we do a lot of teaching and educational days here at what we call our demo site, which is our home ranch. Organizations like Holistic Management International, Kara's Group, NCAT, Dixon Water Foundation. There are periodical research resources, Acres USA, Stockman Grass Farmer. I know I'm probably forgetting some. The other guys can chime in, but there's a plethora of resources and people that have been doing this for decades, some longer than that. And as I said earlier, it's certainly a journey, not a destination. There's days I get up and think, man, I got it figured out. And then the other 362 days out of the year, I realize I don't have a clue. So we're always learning, growing, adapting, changing. The challenges here in Texas, every environment is challenging. Texas tends to be a little bit more challenging. So I encourage everybody to search out those resources, attend as many day events as you can, places within a couple of hours view. As the world opens back up, Lord willing, in 2021, there'll be a lot more opportunities. But I agree with what Kara said earlier. There are more and more, Mandy, you said the same thing, more and more people coming into this movement, wanting to learn, wanting to grow. And the beauty about where we are in the history of agriculture is there are enough people that have been doing it long enough, and unlike generations past, are very willing to share and mentor. So if you're interested, there is a sea of things to explore out there.
Thanks, Chad. Leah, let's try to get one, maybe two more questions in before we have to wrap up.
Awesome. Yeah, I know we're right at 3 minutes, I think, until 3. So one more question that I see. Can anyone comment on the value of ongoing monitoring and documenting changes? Are there any good historic kind of studies that we can use as baseline?
Well, at the with the Soil for Water Initiative, we have 16 different trials. Well, we have 16 ranches where we have regenerative trials going on. Both Mandy and Jeremiah are both enrolled in that initiative, and we have trials going on their ranches. That's separate from the trial that Mandy did with the SARE, with Southern SARE. But yes, this type of monitoring and research has just begun, and it takes a long time. So many of these trials have only been underway for maybe 3 years, some a little bit more depending on which organization you're looking at, but they take anywhere between 6 to 10 years before you start seeing those changes. Nonetheless, as Mandy was saying, it's a day in, day out watching the land, watching the environment, looking at the climate, looking at the weather, and seeing, okay, what's going on this year? How did I move my cattle this year? So just keeping a grazing management plan so you know what you did and what the weather was like is really important for learning your land. And as we develop our research, we will be posting more and more of that on the Soil for Water website. We're working to create something called the Regenerative Ag Atlas, which will be posting stories about different people's practices in different regions of the United States, because they're not all going to be the same everywhere.
I'll just add real quickly to that. You monitor because you want to see if you're meeting your goals. And so we have goals as producers, what we want to achieve. And so that's kind of why you do it. And you don't have to go to any of these drastic measures of getting this fancy equipment. You can have something as simple as a grazing exclosure, where you set that up and see what's happening when I'm not grazing this area, and just monitor that year to year. So it does not have to be complicated. You asked about where you could go to. I know there's probably a lot of places, but the one that comes to mind is A&M AgriLife bookstore, which is online. There's probably a pasture monitoring 101. So just search AgriLife Extension and pasture monitoring. They'll probably have some good basic information for landowners.
And at NCAT, we have a lot of great monitoring protocols that we can share too.
All right, everybody. Well, it is 2:59, about to be 3 p.m. So with that, I'd like to thank our audience for their great questions, for joining us this afternoon. I want to thank our panelists for making my job incredibly easy and fun. I really appreciated the conversation. I know y'all are remarkably busy people, so thanks for all that you're doing, especially for joining us this afternoon. And with that, we're going to transition from regenerative grazing and land health to something else that's just as important, water.